as the other sessions have set a very, very high bar for being punctual. And so you're going to begin.
So, as I said, all sessions today are titled Classical Indian Philosophy and Philosophy of Education. We're going to have two papers again in this session, one by Professor Srinivasa-Varakhedi, Professor and Dean, Karnataka Sanskrit University, Bangalore. The title of his paper is Authoring Textbook, Ancient Indian Methodology. The second paper would be by Assistant Professor Hiraman Tiwari, Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. The title of that paper is Context and Text, Commentary and Dialogue as Education in Ancient India. We welcome the chair, Parimal Patil, to head the session now. Thanks.
Srinivasa-Varakhedi to present his paper. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Dear, post-lunch sessions are very difficult to lead. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. At the outset, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on methodology employed by Indian authors in writing textbooks. I'm a student of philosophy. I'm a practicing educationist. I do not have any experience or expertise in the field of philosophy of education. However, my interactions with the scholars in this field of teachers' education, I gained some eligibility to talk on this subject. My topic is authoring textbooks, Indian methodology. I start with a brief account of the Indian notion on holistic approach of human life and education. As all of us know, the education is for betterment of human life. According to Indian thinkers and philosophers, life is governed by purusharthas, namely dharma, guiding principles of life, artha, wealth, kama, comforts, moksha, freedom from all constraints. This kind of complete life is the ultimate goal of life. Education is means to achieve it. The process of education has two phases, teaching and learning, which takes place through the communication. It is commonly agreed that the language is the prominent means of education. Sometimes the points which I am making are not available on the slides. Some points I am skipping. So here language means verbal communication which involves linguistic utterance. Hence, Indian tradition primarily adopts oral method of transmission. The Vedic recitation tradition is coming down from the ages of thousands of years. It is astonishing to note that the whole Vedic text is transmitted without any modification, even with respect to a single syllable. The similar tradition is followed with regard to Vedangas and Smriti literature. Though we find some interpolation here and there, it does not make any difference in textual understanding. The Indian philosophical poetry tradition has produced innumerable works. We can divide them into three classes, Shruti, Smriti and Kavya. Panini in his Ashtadhyayi mentions 5 types of Sanskrit literature that existed in his time. Drishta. Drishta is that which is seen or visualized. According to him, this class includes the text, Vedic texts, that are not known to have been created by any person. Prokta means expressed or taught. A vast body of the knowledge was available in the form of texts in Panini's time, which deal with various disciplines. I just skipped the names: Brahmana, Shiksha, Vyakarana, Nirukta, Kalpa, Chandas, Jyotisha, Itihasa, Puranas, and Shilpa. This vast literature deals with a body of knowledge that has been formulated by a perceptor. The third one is Upajnata. Upajnata is that kind of text which deals with a new body of knowledge that has been conceptualized by an individual and the knowledge acquired by oneself without being taught. Panini's Ashtadhyayi itself is one of such texts. Krita is creative composition. Plays, poetic literature, and similar ones are included in this category. The fifth one is Vyakhyana. Commentary is the fifth one. A commentary is that which interprets the original text or fixes the meaning to the text. Thus, we must note here that leaving the first four specific categories, the last one includes the whole gamut of textual compositions. Indian texts are available through oral tradition. They range from brief sutra to huge Mahakavyas like Mahabharata and Ramayana. The term Kriti mentioned by Panini signifies the text that has an origin. The English term text could be synonym for Kriti. In this sense, text may mean written or verbal. In India, any linguistic composition is verbal. Hence, here text means verbal text. If you consider Ashtadhyayi, it is not a mere text on the printed or written page. In fact, it is an oral text with rich accent signs. It is informed in the tradition of grammar that Panini read this entire text in Ekashrutiswara. Ekashrutiswara, single tone, and he read same parts in different intonations whenever the change of subject or topic is necessary. For example, the employment of Swarita Swara accent to mark the Adhikara Sutra, the rule that introduces a new topic and holds till next topic is taken up. Thus, the texts the texts are marked with some kind of swaras. You cannot write them. You can, utter, you can pronounce the swaras. Thus, the texts, especially Shastric texts, are very brief and abbreviated in nature. This requires the explanation or debriefing. Thus, the commentary tradition started to interpret these texts. There is no doubt, due to the requirement of the oral transmission method, the text to be brief and short so that they can be stored accurately in the memory. Through several devices, the authors achieved economy in words and syllables. This sutra style writing approach of Indian writers contributed to brevity and hence complexity of the text. The complexity increases when you achieve brevity. This made the explanatory commentaries necessary. With this, it became possible to keep the entire text in mind and to comprehend the process it in an easy way. Another feature of these texts is their highly rich organized structure. Indian texts have a thematic organization. The topics in a text are organized in the form of prakarana, adhyaya, paricheda, mandala, etc. In Mimamsa Sutras, each adhyaya is divided into many sections based on the topics chosen for discussion. Each topic, Vishaya. We have Vishaya, Vishayaschaiva, Purupakshas Tathottaraha. Vishaya means subject matter for discussion. Vishaya will be invoked with a doubt, samshaya. Then an argument by opponent will be put forth. This is called Purupaksha, stand of opponent. At last, the answer from the proponent side is proposed with some supportive evidences. Thus, a topic will be led to a conclusion. The part of the body, this part of the body of the text, with this kind of treatment of each topic is called Adhikarana. The chief commentary of Sutra is called Bhashya, where each Sutra is interpreted, elaborately discussed, sometimes challenged. Sutra is challenged by Bhashyakara. The commentary on Bhashya is called Tika, where the new objections are raised upon the same subject matter for discussion refuted. Thus, the idea proposed in the Bhashya is upheld with justifiable reasons in Tika. This kind of tradition suggests that Indian tradition is an interpretative tradition. The life of this tradition is interpretation of texts, fixing the meaning to the text. The interpretation of text is nothing but paraphrasing a text through another statement. There is a famous saying that do not read the lines, but read the spaces between the lines. The idea is not spoken, but idea is kept hidden in the spaces between words. In order to get the meaning or to make the meaning out of the text, many strategies and techniques are employed. It is a kind of linguistic exercise in artha nirdharana, determination of meaning, by way of looking at all levels like lexical, grammatical, propositional, syntactical, pragmatic, and discourse. According to the nature of the statement in the text, the interpretations take different forms, showing the segments, padacheda, showing the segments by splitting the words in right places, giving the meaning through synonyms, padarthokti, giving annotations, brief comments, insertions of appropriate ellipsis words, paraphrasing the complex sentences, showing the order of the syntax, elaboration of the content by giving examples and counterexamples, giving relevant references, raising objections and giving solutions, etc. This is the nature of commentary. To sum up, this kind of enterprise of interpretation is one, determining the meaning of the object text, establishing the relevance or showing the application in the context, articulating the rationality of the idea. I quote Rajashekara. In his Kavyamamsa, Rajashekara enumerates the varieties of commentaries. Commentary that explains sutra is vritti. Analysis of vritti is paddhati. Bhashya is detailed commentary on sutra. Samiksha, deeper meanings of bhashya. Simple explanatory note on bhashya is tika. Glossary of difficult words is panchika. Karika is brief explanation of sutra in the shloka form. Additional or unexpressed meaning is explained by Vartika. There are many such notes on commentaries. The very idea of putting content in the form of text, then writing commentary and sub-commentaries on them in the Indian tradition, this is the style in Indian tradition, suggests us that this tradition wanted a specific way of learning in education process. These are three benefits we can find. There are three benefits we can find here. One, the interpretation skill that required to understand the object text, original text, is gotten by the pupil in the learning process as taught by the teacher. The object text in the mind will reduce the pressure on the memory because it will be very small. Object text will be very small. The size of object text will be very small. Rather, this style increases the reasoning power to think. This is one. Second, each statement of the object text is introduced or invoked with a query in the commentary. So the commentary introduces or invokes the text by way of putting some question. So always you will have a question and the answer at the end of interpretation. So this kind of style will provoke you to think. Question and answer, question and answer. So at the end of the answer given by the author is explained. With this, the pupil is trained in probing and inquiring into a subject. This style of presentation increases the thinking process in education system. The textbook is not mere an informative storage, but it is a tool that triggers thinking process in the minds of learner. To illustrate the importance of commentary in order to get the proper meaning of a text, the best example is, one example I just refer to Hela Raja's commentary on Vakyapadiya. Vakyapadiyam is a work that deals with the philosophy of language. While discussing substance, Bhartrhari enlists the terms that denote substance such as Atma, Vastu, Swabhava, Tattva and so on. Yeah, this point is not available there. Commentator points out here that these terms, Atma, Vastu, Swabhava and Tattva and so on, these terms are used in the sense of substance in different systems of philosophy. For Advaitins, it is Atma. Sankhyas call it Vastu. Others call it Swabhava. Charvaka call it Tattva. If this insight is missed, there are chances of misinterpretation of the text. Thus, the interpretative method by way of writing commentaries on original text is found an interesting education tool in oral tradition of education in India. So I skipped some of the points here. Historically, we find a good number of works are authored to introduce the basic ontology and epistemologies of different disciplines. Starting from 12th century, such works are found in almost all Shastric disciplines. These preliminary texts are considered highly helpful in introducing the concepts in an easy method. Tarka Sangraha in Nyaya tradition is one such example. It is an introductory monograph written in simple and lucid language. In order to make it more comprehensible or to make it more elaborative, the author Annam Bhatta himself has authored a commentary on the same. Similarly, Karikavali, composed in the form of poetic meter, along with its commentary Muktavali, is also widely studied. The Vedanta Paribhasha of Dharmarajadhvari, which introduces the epistemology of Advaita Vedanta, Pramana Paddhati of Jaitirtha, which introduces the epistemology of Dvaita Vedanta, in the field of Vedanta epistemologies, are also prominent textbooks written for novice. Such texts are written in simple and lucid language, and hence they can be read easily without the support of any commentary. Yet, you will find number of commentaries on these texts, which is very interesting. Say about 10 or 12 commentaries are available on Pramana Paddhati. On Tarkasangraha, you will find about 30 and 35 commentaries easily. So even now, the commentaries are written on the same Tarkasangraha. So this is a very interesting point. So you will find plenty of commentaries on these works that make them high standard works. Note that the commentaries make them high standard works. That gives lot of scope for debate in the philosophical circles. Simple sentences of these texts are elaborated with ample explanation, with which many objections are raised and answered by the commentator. Now I switch over to the topic Shastra Paddhati, way of Shastric presentation. Shastra Paddhati. In the beginning of any Shastric work, we can find a unique discussion about Anubandha Chatushtaya, which shapes the content to be presented in the proposed work. The author has to identify, in the beginning, author has to identify the eligible reader of the book. He has to describe the eligibility. He has to identify the eligible reader of the book before he undertakes the collection of the topics. He shall also identify and keep the purpose of the book in mind, and then the specific subject matter that has to be taken up in the book. So, this is Adhikari, Vishaya, Prayojana, Sambandha. Adhikari, the eligible reader, Vishaya, the subject matter, and Prayojana, the purpose of the text. In other words, the eligible reader, subject matter, and the purpose connected with each other form the book. These important factors would play a vital role in writing a textbook. Another important plan employed in writing and deciding the presentation in 4 stages. Uddesha, Lakshana, Vibhaga, and Pariksha. This is the methodology that is employed in the presentation. You take any topic, you have to place your content in these stages. Uddesha is naming the topics and listing the topics. Uddesha is naming or labeling the objects. If you see, without giving name or label, we cannot talk about them. So, before getting into a subject, the clear labels are given to the objects that are taken for discussion. For example, in Tarkasangraha, Dravya Guna Karma Samanya Vishesha Samvaya Bhavaha Sapta Padarthaha. This statement is Uddesha statement. This statement enlists the categories that are taken for discussion in the book. The second stage is defining, Lakshana, defining the objects. What is definition? Lakshana is the distinctive attribute or property which is present invariably, covering all instances of the object to be defined. Covering all objects to be defined and is not found anywhere else than the object to be defined. Characteristics, for example, if you want to define mobile, what is mobile? Mobile is a device that facilitates to talk to any person in distance without a wire or physical connectivity. Even then, you can ask the question that a wireless something device that is used by police can be mobile. It is not mobile. So you have to insert one more word, saying that worldwide, in distance, worldwide. So that device which is used by police, you cannot use that device to talk to somebody who is in America. So this manner you can avoid ativyapti. Vatsyayana in his uddishtasya atatva vivechako dharmaha, an attribute an attribute which differentiates the object from all other things is Lakshana. He defines Lakshana. This is definition of definition. So what is the function or purpose of the definition? There are 2 possible functions of definition. One of the functions or purposes of the definition is to differentiate the defined objects from other members of the same class or the members of the other class. Sajatiya, Vijatiya, Vyavrittattvena, Lakshavadharanam, Lakshanasya Prayojanam. I think this is for Parimal and Stephen. Distinction also enables us to describe and distinguish the objects in terms of words for carrying the carrying out communication or any activity. Vyavaharo va lakshanasya prayojanam. So the third stage is vibhaga, classification. If you see Tarka Sangraha, he enumerates the categories, then he starts defining each category. Dravya, dravyam, tatra dravyani. Then he defines prithvi. Then he defines one by one. So the entire text is designed in this way. Uddesha, Lakshana, Vibhaga, Pariksha. That's it. So the entire text is designed with this classification, Uddesha, Lakshana, Vibhaga, Pariksha. Vibhaga, what is Vibhaga? Vibhaga is classifying act of any defined object into subclasses. For example, mobile can be further classified into 2G, smart, 3G, and basic model, and so on. But one thing I would note here, classification is enlisting the properties that are subclass of a class, subsets of a subset, and they are mutually exclusive. This is very important. They are mutually exclusive. For example, classification of human being would be men and women and the other. So here you cannot the class of men cannot be included in class of women. These two are mutually exclusive. They cannot go together. They cannot live together. So this is what classification we define. And then pariksha, evaluation or examination. Every topic will be dealt with this kind of presentation approach. So one more important thing I would make here, each in a big treatise like Muktavali, there are many subsections, prakaranas. Each section will have a link, sangati. So with such sangatis, relations, namely prasanga, avasara, upodghata, hetuta, avasara, etc., they play a very important role in placing the sections one after the other. And I skipped some of the points. So I wanted to just read this passage on language and style. The technical language developed by the Navya school, a unique tool in Indian philosophy that later becomes a standard language of all Shastric discourses. The language, Navya language, was used in different dialectics of ontologically opposite philosophies. Both are ontologically opposite philosophies, but they use the same language and same technique, which is given by Navya. For example, in the Advaita Siddhi of Madhusudana Saraswati, in the Purvamimamsa of Khandadeva, in the Bhattarahasya of Bhattarahasya, and so on, it is also employed in later grammatical works of Paninian school, poetics, Hindu law, and other branches of Indic studies. In one sense, this language is considered as language of philosophy in India. It is therefore strongly recommended to undertake the study of Navya language, the ontology of Vaisheshikas, for the students of any Indian Shastric school, without which one cannot paraphrase a single line of Shastric monograph written in Navya style. Hundreds of monographs dealing with different subjects in different disciplines are authored in Navya language that shows the influence of this language on Indian school of thought. In conclusion, thus Indian text writing method is based on the methodology of interpretation adopted by the tradition, is coherent in the oral way of transmission method. It is very coherent with the oral way of transmission method. It can be understood with an analogy of mat which can be carried by folding and expanded at any point of time for use. If you carry a mat, you can fold it and carry it to some other place, and anytime you can expand it by way of interpretation. So in this way, you can use the Indian text for your use any point of time by way of interpretation. It can be similarly, Indian textual interpretation method facilitates the learner to keep the text in mind intact and use it as and when it is required with this interpretation. The most textbooks are written in the form of Vadakatha. This is very interesting to note. The texts are written in the form of Vadakatha. Vadakatha means a cordial dialogue between students and teacher. Vada is a dialogue between student and teacher, which engages the learner and educator in an useful dialogue that leads to achieve the purpose of the education. If you see the entire Indian tradition, the texts are written in the form of dialogue. So with this, I think time is up. So I conclude my paper. Thank you very much. So my stand. See, for example, it is Vedanta Paribhasha of Advaita. And here, in the beginning, the instrument of knowledge is defined. Pramakaranam pramanam. The distinctive cause of knowledge is pramana. And then, after some elaboration, he puts a question. Nanu siddhante ghatadehi mithyattvena bhajitatva tadjnanam katham pramanam. This is a question. Nanu. If you see the style of writing in the text, always it starts with nanu. Nanu is a question. Okay. So now he says, this is translation. Since in our final view, pot, etc., being intuition of Brahman because of the Shruti, and thus since what is intended by the word unsublated is not being sublated during the state of samsara, there is no non-pervasion of the valid cognition of pot, etc. So in this way, the texts are written in the Vadakatha. With this, I would conclude my presentation, and I thank the chair.
10 minutes for questions. So let's let Professor Varakhedi sit down. And would you like to take questions one at a time or 3 or 4 at a time? Let's see how it goes. All right. We'll start with one at a time.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, we all know that Bhagavad Gita is a part of Mahabharata, but however, when it is taken as a separate scripture, how should we categorize it, either as a tika, alochana, bhashya, or vyakhyana, or any other thing like? Thank you.
Should we start?
Namaskar. That was a very interesting session. Thank you for elaborating so well. I have a question. There's a oral tradition which is being carried out in this manner, and somewhere we start writing our texts. And what got lost in that writing? Because when I was reading some other things, when supposing Panini is saying something and then versions of it are, anyway people are remembering and transmitting. Vedas, I know there has been no change at all, but what about these other granthas? What happens when versions come? And do these versions do other versions get lost? Because I do find what happens when, in the Gurukula system, for example, if they're doing the same Panini, do they also use the monotone and the change of the tone now? Or does it get lost and therefore something happens to the text when it is written down? So these are two different questions.
Why don't we start with those, and maybe the answers will trigger some more questions.
Yeah. The first question is on Bhagavad Gita. Of course, I think next speaker can really answer this question because his topic is text in the context. I think Bhagavad Gita, your question will be answered there. And it is the second question about when the information is lost, when we write something and we carry on some information in the oral tradition and information is lost, how do you get it back? So, I am taught in a traditional way of Gurukula system. It is very interesting point that we do not really care about what is said by somebody. We try to interpret on our own. So there is a tendency that we enjoy that freedom. So we are not captured by some views or some views that are held in the tradition. So even if it is lost, we don't have any problem. And the text which is written is only a tool for our discussion, which is it just helps us to think, that's all. So we are not really dependent on the text. We independently think and the text is used as a tool. So I think your question is answered.
Maybe if I could ask a question that's related to that. You had a very insightful phrase. You said that what commentarial practices do is they fix meaning to texts. He did not say that they extract meaning from texts. So I'm wondering if you could expand on what it means to fix a meaning to a text.
Yeah, it's really very interesting question. To fix the meaning to a text. What happens, if you see the tradition of Vedanta, you have Brahma Sutras. Sutras are same. The interpreter, from the point of view of Dvaita, he fixes the meaning. And he is not extracting the meaning out of this text. Instead, he fixes the meaning. And he says, this is the meaning of this sutra. In this way, many commentaries try to fix the meaning rather than extracting the meaning. This is what I felt when I read the commentaries on Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutras. But in the tradition of Panini, this does not happen. Because all the way, the Panini has given some paribhashas, how to interpret the sutras, then it is so practical. So you cannot go beyond the practice, so that the commentators are very careful in extracting the meaning.
Yes, I see we have another round of questions. So
I used to do, they argued that proper function of knowledge is not seeing or demonstrating, it's just interpreting text. So their work was also largely focused on interpretation and writing commentaries. So this makes me think that perhaps this kind of interpretive scholarly work was not limited to India, and it was part of the wider world. And somehow Europe could make that shift from looking for knowledge beyond text, like from Bacon, when he said that we should read the book of nature, so we should look for knowledge outside text, and that started the whole empirical emphasis in acquiring knowledge. So maybe you can elaborate on that connection.
Yeah, I would like to comment on this. Interpretation is of two ways. Interpreting the text and interpreting the nature, objects, directly. You need not, even we interpret our experiences. In Indian tradition, we interpret our experiences. The same experiences are interpreted in different ways, elaborated in different ways, explained in different ways. The same experiences are taken as evidences in different stands. For example, for Advaita and for Dvaita, and it is quite possible. So we are not interpreting the text, we are interpreting the experiences also. See, but we should also note that without language, Shabdanuveda, without the word, you cannot think. Thoughts are not possible. When thoughts are not possible, and without text, the thinking process is not possible. This is what understood by Indian thinkers. Of course, knowledge is possible beyond our text, but that knowledge is different. So that level is different. We are in the dialogue, so which is very essential. I think this is my comment on.
Is there a hand somewhere?
Bhavat Vadena Anugrahitosmi.
Dhanyosmi.
First a comment, the idea of fixing a meaning to the text also worries me. And I see how you arrive at that idea from the Brahma Sutra, where Ramanuja and Shankara and others differ enormously in how they fix meaning to the text, which makes you wonder whether, we'll carry it back a bit to understanding the Upanishads, whether it's Shruti that's the real pramana in these cases. They seem to get their view somewhere else. And I mean, at least that seems to be suggested in the very idea of fixing a meaning to the text. So that bothers me. But let me, my question is on something else, and that is this structure. You mentioned 2 or 3 structures: the Purvapaksha and Siddhanta structure of text, and also the identifying the adhikatan, and then the uddesha and lakshana and pariksha structure to a shastric text. Your examples, unfortunately, were drawn from philosophy, where there is a circle of people who are reading one another's texts across schools. Many philosophers were experts in more than one system and surely did know as far as possible, got their hands on texts from other schools, even Gnostica schools. But how about, I mean, I'm just not as familiar as you, sir, with the literature. How about in other shastras, like the Dharma Shastra, the Shilpa Shastra, and so on? Do we find the same structure? I mean, have the philosophers succeeded in instructing? It seems that you made this claim, at least in your abstract, that the philosophers taught other textbook writers, and not just philosophic textbook writers, but textbook writers across fields, how to proceed. Is that borne out by the actual structure of lots of texts in these other areas?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question. I'll certainly look into those texts and come back to you with an answer. But right now, what is my observation is, even in Dharma Shastra, we find some kind of structure where the purpose is very important. Achieving the purpose, the prayojana is very important rather than the actions or prescriptions. So that always the focus is on prayojana. Now, keeping the prayojana in the central point, the rest is defined. So that much I know. The remaining things, I'll just go and visit the Dharma Shastra books and come back.
Were they embedded within a community which was already an oral community? How were they supposed to function, these texts?
Well, this is a very difficult question for a philosopher, because I'm not a historian. But what I know is, if you look at the grammar tradition, if you look at the tradition of Nyaya, so as far as I know, Nyaya communities are there, and grammar communities are there. So those communities need not be the communities of social structure, I'm sure. And even in mathematics, if you go to Kerala, the texts are coming down from the oral tradition, in the oral tradition, but the communities are not defined by the social structure. They are defined by the subject. The student who carries the tradition is the way of oral tradition. That's all. Is the vehicle. That's all. So in that way, communities are formed and they are maintained.
We have a few minutes, but one thing maybe I'll say on this is that the answer to that question is historically sensitive. So it seems that before the 11th century, maybe before the 10th century, the answer to that question would be very, very different than the way it was after the 13th century. If the question is, in what kinds of communities did different kinds of textual practices function and why? There's definitely a kind of shift that took place, I think. But a lot more work needs to be done on exactly what that is, and we can talk about that later.